There are a bunch of sites that I see smartly curating news and video and opinion. I'm very fond of one actually out there in the UK, owned by Felix Dennis, called The First Post. Drudge actually never loses its flair for homing in on must-read headlines, and of course, the Huffington Post has done a really wonderful job, I think, of collecting an array of liberal voices and aggressively promoting citizen journalists who show up with the goods. Real Clear Politics very effectively rounds up essential opinion. In the culture realm, Arts and Letters Daily is, to me, as enjoyable as browsing a bookshop that also stocks the performing arts. But there is still room, I think, for more meta-aggregation with a distinctive voice, just as there's always been room for a new magazine that has a distinctive point of view. In the early days of Vanity Fair in 1984, everywhere I went, I ran up against what I came to think of as the New York finger. Some expert or smartass stabbing me in the chest and telling me the reason that the magazine was a non-starter. It wasn't a fashion magazine, it wasn't a news magazine, it wasn't a movie magazine, so what was it? The readers, it turned out, made out their own minds. Jan Wenner got the same New York finger for Us magazine. Forget about it, they all said. People has that market all locked up. Or for that matter, why yet another book about Princess Diana? Most people told me when I was writing that book that there was nothing more to say. That in fact, it was simply a book that everyone had already written. But I did learn a lot from doing that book, because there was plenty to say about Diana if you started to think about her again, and there was plenty to say about Diana if you went back to original sources and talked to people who'd never talked, and people in a way who even had talked, but whose information, in a sense, hadn't been used except in the same old way. I learned a lot also that people will read about things at certain times, but they won't read it about others. That just when you think that you heard everything about a subject is just when you have to re-examine it, because at that point you actually know nothing. There's so much material sometimes about people that you just sort of, you wash it out. It just becomes background news. It becomes like information wallpaper. And the accepted stereotype goes up there and you think you know it, but in fact you don't. Time and again I meet people and I think, wow, you're absolutely nothing like what I've heard. You are just nothing like what I've read. And I'm thinking, I wonder why it is that this person has this image of being so utterly different from the way they really are. And I think it's frequently because of this phenomenon that I talked about of journalism, of just people basically taking the same 4 or 5 facts and rearranging them with a different headline. And there is nothing like, of course, the fresh look, the re-report, and the re-answering of questions. Online, of course, has done something wonderful. It's enabled us to break free of the idea, a residue from mainstream media, that if you read one thing, you can't read another, and that there's room for only one voice, one style in any particular marketplace. That binary thinking that has governed journalism is dead online, as much as it is in politics, and as much as it is in our complicated multi-platform lives. And I also relish that online allows outlets to get up and evolve with alacrity, rather than living under the gauntlet of some far-off launch date without a whit of user input until the thing hits the stands. At the Daily Beast, we're working at a feverish pace that would have been impossible in my print days. We started development only 8 weeks ago, and we hope to be up sometime in the early fall. Our launch will be an evolutionary one, responding as we go along to our users' critiques and comments, adding new features every 3 to 6 weeks, and adapting. But it's evolution at speed, fruit fly speed, not dinosaur feed. The glorious age of convergence, where mainstream media feeds the blogosphere, and the blogosphere feeds the mainstream media, and YouTube feeds the mainstream, and so on, really has allowed, I think, editors to be more creative than they've ever been before. The abundance of wikis and user-generated reviews and citizen journalism means that journalists today have access to more information, both filtered and raw, than ever before. And all of it is multiplying not just the tools, but also the stakes for editors to do what they're trained to do. What we hope to offer is a site that makes life easier for the sophisticated and impatient news junkie who wants a speedy scan of the zeitgeist through a lens that's trustworthy, irreverent, and questioning. The truth is that even in today's overcrowded marketplace, it's amazing how we do in fact make time for something that we either really want to read or see, or have been made to read by the presentation skills of a skillful editor or producer. Much of my time at magazines was spent toiling over headlines and cover lines and blurbs that would seduce the unsuspecting reader into discovering a piece they might not have considered otherwise opening. The legendary New York Times reporter James Reston once said with a sigh, "Americans will do everything for Latin America, except read about it." But now that doesn't mean we shouldn't try and make them do it and figure out creatively how we can get readers to read things they wouldn't otherwise do. And I think that the web is an immensely creative medium for doing that, in the way it can bring in new voices, bring in new approaches, and keep going with a story, keep sort of campaigning with a story in a way that you actually can't do in print, because you're so worried about the newsstand sales and the advertisers. That's a great liberation for an editor that I think should be more celebrated by people in mainstream media who keep going on about what they can't do anymore because there isn't the support for it. In fact, the web really does support freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and an ability to take risks in ways that print people, frankly, and network people have not been allowed to do because of the extraordinarily boring corporate hierarchies in which they exist. And I think that it could be said that the first duty of a journalist, whether in print or on the web or on TV, is to arouse interest. The second is to bring a skeptical intelligence and the honed instincts of the professional. The third is to let natural curiosity guide and prevail over the deadly commercial fallacy that declares that readers and viewers are only willing to read what they've already read about. The web has done a glorious job so far of disproving that old saw, and I'm looking forward immensely with the team at the Daily Beast to plunging into the fray. Thank you very much for hearing me out, and I'm happy to answer any questions you like.